This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Breaking news, WABC.
And welcome to Katz and Cosby. John has the day off. He's in acting, by the way. I'm going to be his agent. I think we're going to make big bucks. But we have Governor Pataki with us, Craig Eaton, and Judge Richard Weinberg. And big breaking news, guys. President Trump has just picked Dr. Mehmet Oz to run Medicare, Medicaid office. He is going to be the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services administrator. And it also comes as Howard Lutnick, who was co-chairman of his transition team. He has been picked as Commerce Secretary. And Sean Duffy, the former congressman, has now been picked as Transportation Secretary. Governor Pataki, what do you make of all of these choices? What are we going to be picked as? Come on.
We're just cheering from the sideline, Rita, but I have to say I think Howard Lutnick was a great pick. Commerce is going to be very important in this administration because the president has talked about tariffs, not just tariffs on China, but also dealing with Mexico and dealing with Europe and perhaps tariffs across the board on some products. And this is all going to be something that the Commerce Secretary is going to have to be very, very involved in. And I think Howard Lutnick is exactly the right person. You know, he runs Cantor Fitzgerald, which was a tragic victim of the September 11th attacks.
They lost 600 plus employees.
Over 600
right?
employees on September 11th. And he has done a tremendous job rebuilding it and running a very major organization. And so I think he will do a tremendous job. The concern I have about a lot of the appointments is it's one thing to be at the top and to have a vision and everything. But getting the deep state, the permanent government, the bureaucrats who have been there for 20 years to actually listen to you is something that is very difficult to do. And I just hope they have the team in place, not just the secretary, but the team underneath them to change the agencies fundamentally as opposed to just at the top.
Yeah, and that's a great point because Craig Eaton, he's talking about cleaning house, which is why he's picked some of these people like a Pete Hegseth for like a defense secretary. He's talked about get rid of the DEI, get rid of the wokeness in the military.
You know, you got to give President Trump some credit. I mean, he hit the ground running. He's making a lot of appointments really quickly. I like most of his appointments. I will say most. I think Lutnick is amazing. I mean, look what he did for the families of all the people that perished on September 11th. He took care of their families for years and years and years, and that shows what type of a person he is. So he deserves that. And some of his other picks I think are great. Some of them I'm not that crazy about, but I guess time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. And in the middle of all this, Judge Weinberg, a big decision also. It's a big breaking news day. Alvin Bragg. This is the guy who, under New York City, I wanted to read this because this is astounding to me. We've got this guy. His name is Ramon Rivera. He goes on a stabbing spree the other day. He's now charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder for fatal stabbing attacks in New York City. Guess what, Judge Weinberg? He has 8 prior arrests, and he's released. Give me a break.
This is a man who should never have been released by the judge. This is a man who should have been in a
mental institution
with treatment.
What about behind bars?
Yeah. This is another example of the failure of the progressive Democrats who run Albany to not understand that you have a public safety issue that has to be confronted, has to be addressed, because anybody walking the streets is a potential victim. These 3 people were killed who were minding their own business. There's nothing going on. He just walked up to them and stabbed all three of them to death. It's a horrible thing, and it's the urban nightmare.
It is the urban nightmare.
Young people, too. A couple of them were young.
Young, and get this, he was released from Rikers Island on time-served sentence. Guess when? October 17th. So like a month ago, Governor Pataki.
Yeah, I mean, the judge is right that it's just outrageous how our criminal justice system is failing us, and that's Albany where the laws are weak. But also, I don't think Alvin Bragg should be let off the hook. He's running for re-election next year. I think he is the worst district attorney Manhattan has ever had. Everything from seeing your toothbrush locked up in a drugstore to having these random violent incidents on the streets.
Going after, what about Daniel Penny, Jose Alba, the bodega worker?
And the president.
Right,
and the president. And
we're going to get to that.
I think it's just outrageous. I've said before that if I were the governor, I would remove him for not upholding his oath of office to enforce all the laws. But in the meantime, at least next year, the people of New York, Manhattan, have a chance to throw him out.
So, Craig Eaton, what about somebody? I
would challenge any moderate Democrat in New York City. I wish I was a moderate Democrat in New York City. I would run against him. I mean, he's ripe for the taking right now because of all the laws that he's breaking, all the prosecutions that he's screwing up. If you had a moderate Democrat run against him, I think they could take him out.
There's also been a trend across the country. I mean, we talked about this the other day.
Yeah, 3 of them out in California.
George Gascon,
taken out by a Republican.
Yes,
a Republican.
Yes, who is a diehard, and Craig Eaton also ran on kicking out these and saying that California was fed up with the revolving door of justice for criminals.
More harm to our cities than Soros. Spending all that money funding these characters who are totally unqualified to enforce the laws and protect the citizenry.
Well, their only qualification is that they would not enforce the laws, and that's why he supported them. And it's been a catastrophe. And it's one of the reasons I think President Trump did so much better with minority voters. Yes. They see what's happening in their communities, in their cities, and saying this isn't working. We have to try something different.
So New Yorkers, step up. Let's find somebody who can give this guy a run for his money. It shouldn't be like you're going to have Alvin Bragg again in New York City at a time like this.
But this is a testament to John and everyone at WABC for stressing common sense. Elect common sense people. Look at what's happening out in our streets, and you realize we need change desperately. And look what happened, the overwhelming victory for Donald Trump. That's the people speaking out and saying, we want change. We want safe streets. We want clean streets. We don't want our migrants running our streets. We want safe borders.
So now's the time. Great points, Craig.
Rita, that's exactly right. Now is the time to start getting ready because 2025, as the governor and Craig know, the municipal elections here in New York City, the mayor, the public advocate, the city controller, the 51 members of the council, they're all up. And we need common sense, reasonable people who understand what you have to do to make it a city that survives.
And that's right around the corner.
And let's not forget, you got some governor races. You got Jack Ciattarelli running for governor in New Jersey in 2025. The primaries in June, election in November, and there's a few other governor races around the state.
Virginia,
this is our time.
Virginia.
Yes.
This is our time. Continue.
If California can do it, why can't New York City do it?
That's a message. People have sent a message. We don't want progressive prosecution anymore.
Absolutely.
We want realistic judges, realistic prosecutors.
So let's talk about what happened with Marshawn today, because we're waiting to see. This is the judge of the New York case, Judge Weinberg. First of all, Alvin Bragg, as we're talking about, he's ignoring these cases, right, that we're talking about that deal with quality of life and public safety. And yet what he came out with a couple hours ago is we're going to maybe keep this hanging over Donald Trump until he gets out of the White House.
The gambit is he'll agree. He'll suggest to Judge Marshawn, don't sentence him until after he leaves the White House.
That's incredible.
Okay, in 2029. That's very nice of him. But he's now going to oppose the application of the defense team to dismiss the indictments and the convictions. And what they really should do is Marshawn was doing the right thing. He would dismiss these indictments and these convictions and get rid of it. Because the fact of the matter is this trial should be reversed. This is a textbook example, and the governor and Craig know this as good lawyers, textbook example of everything that was wrong about a prosecution and all evidentiary rulings that were wrong by Judge Merchan.
And joining us now to talk more about this is Professor Alan Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz, what is your reaction to the fact that Bragg, as you just heard from Judge Weinberg, is saying, you know what, we'll just kind of continue this. He's not dismissing the case. He is saying a delay, but he's saying maybe after he gets out of the White House. The people have spoken, Professor Dershowitz.
Well, I predicted this exactly. I predicted it on my podcast. I said he's going to try to postpone the sentence 4 years so that Trump can't appeal. That's the gambit. The gambit is Trump can't appeal unless there is a sentence. And that way he avoids being reversed for 4 years. Now, if I'm Trump's lawyers, and I certainly will communicate with Trump's lawyers about this, immediate mandamus to the appellate division saying, forget about sentencing. If he doesn't want to sentence us, fine. But we have the right to appeal now. And he ought to take the appeal immediately. And if he loses in the appellate division, which he probably will, take it to the New York Court of Appeals and then to the Supreme Court. But he has the right to an immediate appeal, and Bragg is trying to avoid being reversed. And because he knows he's going to be reversed on appeal, so he's trying to avoid that for 4 years.
Merchan understands that too, Alan.
Of course, Merchan understands that. And it's utterly unethical. It's a way of circumventing the appellate process. A lot of people don't realize that you can't appeal a case, even if you have a jury verdict against you, until the sentencing. The judgment is the sentence. And that's why both Bragg, and I don't know if Merchan will go along with it, probably he will, but we can't be sure, is the attempt to try to circumvent and game the process and avoid Trump's ability to appeal. Because if he appeals, he's going to win.
You know what's so just shocking as a layperson? I'm the only non-attorney here. But as I'm sitting here looking at this, Professor Dershowitz, this to me just reeks of politics. Why would Bragg continue to hang this over? You're looking at all these other cases are clearly falling apart, dismissed. They had the Supreme Court decision on immunity, and yet he is continuing it. This to me looks so transparent.
It's the only conviction so far, the only jury verdict, and he wants that to hang over the head. Number one. Number two, he's running for re-election. So far, he's not being primaried. He ought to be primaried. So far, he's not being primaried. But if he is, then he's going to be able to say, I got a conviction. If he gets reversed before the election, it will be terrible for his electoral chances. So it's political in so many different ways. It's political against Trump. It's political in favor of Bragg. And it's also political in favor of Merchan. It's the perfect way out. The only problem is it's unlawful, unconstitutional, unethical, and improper.
Governor Pataki.
Well, I think, Professor, from the beginning, this indictment, let alone the conviction, was of a crime that doesn't exist. And it was just made up for political reasons. And if Merchan had any sense of fairness at all, which I doubt if he does, he would dismiss it in the interest of justice and just have this finally go away. But we had a corrupt prosecutor creating a bogus case where there was no crime, and then a judge tilting the balance so heavily that it was impossible to actually have a fair trial.
And now
so
we have a corrupt process whereby
an entirely
has the right to appeal. Yeah.
An entirely corrupt process. And one of the first of all, it's awful for our political process and for President Trump, but it also sends the message to people that New York is no longer a place where you can even count on the courts. And New York always had some difficult politics, but at least you could count on the courts. And unless Merchan does something that's out of the character that they've shown in the past and dismiss it in the interest of justice and just have this go away as it should have never started, we're going to have people take a look and say, I'm not so sure I can rely on the New York judicial system.
They think that already, don't you think?
The only place we disagree with is when I was growing up in Brooklyn in the 1950s. It was well known in my neighborhood. It cost you, I think it was $15,000 for a Supreme Court judgeship, contributed to the Democratic Party people, the Tammanies of Brooklyn. I think it was $45,000 or $40,000 for an appellate court judge. You know, they were for sale. I'm not saying unqualified people got it. Qualified people
You're saying they got a little cashola.
Well, no, all they were doing was making contributions.
Oh, yes, yeah, totally ethical, totally ethical.
But you know what one of the congressmen was doing? I knew this congressman from Brooklyn. He had two offices. He had his congressional office. This is Emanuel Seller. There's no reason to protect him. He had a congressional office, and right next door was his law office. And if you wanted to bribe him, you just hired his law firm, and you paid them a $10,000, $20,000 retainer for doing whatever they did, and then somehow you'd get a special bill passed in Congress. Corruption was rampant in Brooklyn back in the 50s when I was a kid and involved in Democratic politics.
Oh, wait, Governor Pataki has something on that.
You were a Democrat back then, Alan. What is the saying? I'm kind of concerned about you.
Everybody was a Democrat. In Brooklyn, the way you rank parties, Democrat first, Liberal Party second, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, Republicans were after the Communist Party. There were no Republicans in Brooklyn back in the day. Of course, everybody knew that to have any control or any influence, you had to be a Democrat.
Judge Weinberg.
Alan, I want to ask you a different topic. I want to ask you about this gambit that Trump is pushing for recess appointments. What are your thoughts on that?
Unconstitutional.
Exactly.
Clearly. Recess appointments were intended to make sure that members of the Senate and the Congress who had to go by horse and buggy from Kentucky up to Washington, D.C., didn't leave important government offices like the defense, Army, Treasury, State vacant. It was not intended as a way of circumventing senatorial approval. So I think it'll be struck down. There are already 4 justices in a prior opinion in 2014, I think, who raised questions about recess appointments. And certainly if the purpose of the recess appointment is to avoid congressional scrutiny of people like Getz, I think you'll get a majority of the Supreme Court to strike that down.
And, of course, that's what he's trying to do with these administration appointments. We'll see where this goes. It's really getting interesting.
Great appointments, too. He's made some great appointments.
Absolutely.
He should get credit for that. I think some of his
Getz is not one of them.
Absolutely right. And he's already hinted that Getz probably won't make it. Maybe he's the sacrificial lamb. The Senate will say no to Getz, and maybe they'll say yes to all the rest of them.
Maybe he did it to put fear in, all the people in Tammany Hall and elsewhere that you talked about.
There's another theory, too, and that is Getz wanted a neat exit out of Congress to end the congressional probe, and this gives him a plausible way of getting out of Congress and getting an end to the probe about his ethical conduct.
Yeah, although now it's starting to leak out a little bit. Some of the, Professor Dershowitz, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Love having you here. And of course, today, a huge hearing took place on Capitol Hill, you guys, where they talked about something that the Biden-Harris administration never spoke about. The 300,000 missing kids, the migrant kids that came across the border, and who knows, sadly, where they are. And joining us now to talk about this and also the resistance building up against Trump's plans to do deportation, Ron Vitello, former border chief, former acting ICE director. Ron, let's first start with these missing kids. One of the things that was stunning to me today, there was they cited a case, a whistleblower talked about this one case of a quote sponsor, who was like a foster parent. And that person sponsored 2,500 kids. That should have been alarm bells from day one. Think about how frightening and what's happening to those kids right now.
Yeah, these 4 children, they 300,000+ of them were encountered at the border, let go in the United States, and our own government has no idea where they are at. But we do know that they've been trafficked in the labor scenario. We know they're trafficked as human beings. They talked in the hearing about organ harvesting in Mexico and other places. And so these kids, in theory, left their homes to have a better life in the United States. They got in this pipeline and they were abused in the worst ways possible. And the root problem here is the Biden administration and Vice President Harris, our so-called border czar, kicked open all of the border. They destroyed the control levels that they inherited at the border, putting everyone in danger in the United States, and in putting these people that are in the pipeline at great risk from corrupt governments and cartels that do nothing but trade on the misery of human beings to make money. And so this hearing laid bare there's no justification for what the Biden-Harris administration did when you start to talk about the abuse that these kids have gone through and the lack of control at our border that's led to the worst things possible. And not only did they tear down all the policies that were working, there was a system in place to do rapid DNA testing to children who came across the border without their parents. The Biden administration ended that program, thereby not giving agents on the ground the ability to identify whether if they were traveling with somebody or someone who they will eventually get placed with in the United States was in fact their relatives. And so this administration has no credibility as it relates to any of the domestic operations, as it relates to border security and national security. And we're all going to pay the price. We are paying the price right now. We've watched all week the Laken Riley case where details have come out about this person who was from Venezuela who came and did terrible things to her.
Yeah, a monster who had prior offenses also in Queens and a prior offense in Georgia. And then he obviously crossed the border illegally. And his brother has ties to the Venezuelan gang, Ron.
Yes. And it turns out that the Biden administration gave him an airplane ride to Atlanta.
We did. Taxpayers did, right?
That's right. That's right. And so, I'm very enthusiastic about the new administration coming in. We know that Donald J. Trump is an advocate for a secure border and safe streets in the United States. We have a tough but smart immigration policy that will be enacted both in the interior and at the immediate border. And so I'm looking forward, and I know that the men and women of the Border Patrol, the frontline teams at ICE, et cetera, are very happy that help is on the way.
Thank goodness. Governor Pataki.
Yeah, Ron, thank you for all you did when you were in the position. But I believe right on day one, President Trump's going to sign executive orders reversing a lot of what the Biden-Harris administration did to destroy any effective control at the border. But how long will it take to put back in place the systems you had when it was being run correctly? The detention centers, as you mentioned, the DNA testing, all of this has been dismantled. As a practical matter, assuming we start on day one, how long is it going to take to put in place the systems that you actually had?
Yeah, literally days, right? We have to have an agreement with Mexico for the migrant protection protocols. If they don't want to sign that agreement right away, if they don't want to reinstitute the migrant protection protocols, the safe third country agreements that we had with them and the Northern Triangle, then we need to leverage that. It might take longer to leverage it. It might take longer to incentivize them with a trade tariff or something like that. But once you establish that there's going to be a consequence for crossing the border illegally, then people will stop coming. The problem gets immediately smaller. It gives the front line the opportunity to find people who are being trafficked, to seize more fentanyl and other drugs that are coming across the country, across the border, and be able to target people who are smugglers. And so you've got to reduce the volume. You can do that fairly quickly as long as the people in the pipeline and the smugglers understand that there's going to be a consequence for coming into the United States illegally. And because what's happening now is 85% of everybody that shows up on our border and our shores gets released in the United States. You end that incentives and you start to see immediate effect in the tactical sense. Now, strategically, this agreement with Mexico, probably some leverage with Venezuela and China and other countries to have a repatriation and a removal plan, but it starts immediately. Within hours, you will see a difference on the border.
Let's pray. Former Border Chief Ron Vitello, Judge Weinberg.
Ron, you just hit it. The other aspect of the problem is you have, 10, 15, 20 million people who are here illegally. How do you get them out? How do you set up a system for removal that can work?
So, Judge, as we speak today, there are men and women at ICE that do this work. The fugitive operations teams, there's about 150 across the country. You need to scale up that work. So they need to find the people who are the worst of the worst, criminal aliens, people who have convictions, people who have already been ordered by a judge. Open records say that 1.5 million people in the United States have already had their due process in immigration court. So you target the worst of the worst within that subset of 1.5 million on the non-detained docket. And then you start to scale it up. You scale it up first, probably using state and local and county sheriff's offices, increase the number of 287G agreements across the country. You start with the state and locals. You leverage the state and locals that don't want to help us. And then they're talking today about declaring an emergency and using military assets. And I think that would be a very valuable assistance. Get the front line on the front line and let the logistics experts in our military, help us design detention centers, help us design a transportation program and a repatriation program that starts to bring people into custody and put them on a path for removal.
Yeah, absolutely. And already these mayors and governors from the blue cities, I mean, they're like, nobody's leaving, even the criminals. I mean, it is really, it's going to be an interesting tug of war, that's for sure. Ron Vitello, thank you very much. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for your great service and for protecting the country. Thank you so much. And everybody, coming up next on Katz and Cosby, Brigadier General Blaine Holt. What is Biden doing? He seems to be escalating things big time in the U.S. Entrapment, I will say, in some ways, if you could say that. There's a lot of twists and turns. But is he inching closer to World War III? With weeks left in office. We're going to talk about that and much more.
This holiday season, Lululemon makes it easy to give a gift that goes beyond the moment they open it. There's the sound of them unboxing super soft Lululemon loungewear. And then there's the sound of them slipping into deep recovery mode after every workout. With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. Open the moment. Shop now at Lululemon.com.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Well, we are back here on Katz and Cosby. John has some tapings for a big movie, which we're going to talk about in the future, which is really, really great. And we continue now with General Blaine Holt. General Holt is retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General, former C-17 combat commander, also former U.S. Deputy Military Representative to NATO. And General Holt, this is big news today. Now, apparently, the U.S. Obviously has now, Biden administration allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles into Russia. There are reports that they use several of them. And Putin is saying, well, you know what? We may have to lower the standards on when we use nuclear weapons. Are we on the verge of World War III? What's going on?
Well, it's great to be with you all on a pretty stark day. Unbelievable policy that's being enacted here. While Biden had promised Trump in the Oval Office, no less, that there would be a peaceful, smooth transition of power. Well, if loading President Trump up with a potential World War III and a war that has no reverse gear is smooth, I don't know. I don't know what rough would look like. And if you see the theme, it fits exactly what your last guest was talking about. All of this imperils us here at home much more so than before, because where we're at with this, Putin's argument is that you can't possibly want us to believe that Ukraine can use these missiles independently of the United States or NATO's help. And so therefore that pulls you into the war. You're a party to it. And we're going to revise our nuclear doctrine because we told you we would about 5 months ago if you did this. The problem is this. I don't think Putin wants a greater or wider war. He only has to make it 68 days to President Trump coming in to negotiate an end to this thing as well. But now that Ukraine has the ability to go ahead and fire these missiles, all it takes is a miscalculated missile that sneaks through a defense, hits the Kremlin, hits a school, hits a hospital, and then suddenly Putin has no choice because the Russian people are putting him into a war with no reverse gear. It's very dangerous. And there are other options besides just nuclear that Putin has at his fingertips. We saw a little bit of that in the Baltic yesterday with data cable cuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Governor Pataki, you know the region well.
Yes, General, I have to raise some questions about what you were saying here. You know, you were just saying how suppose one of these ATACMS missiles hits a hospital, Russia will have to act. Well, Russia's been destroying Ukrainian hospitals and schools and nurseries for close to 3 years. Putin has engaged in an evil war of aggression against a country that was recognized globally as an independent, moving towards a democratic country. Should we just all of a sudden sit back and say, well, we can't anger Russia? I know the goal is to have a negotiated settlement, but it seems to me the stronger Ukraine is, the more likely a reasonable settlement could be achieved.
Well, so I agree with you. If you want to look at it about the moral test of this war, but these missiles don't equate to a military victory. There is no way that an ATACMS missile is going to reclaim 1 acre of Ukrainian land. There is no one here on the call with you that is in any way defending Russia whatsoever. But where we're at now, and let's be very clear, Zelensky and Ukraine are not a nuclear power. Russia is. And they're revising their nuclear doctrine right now, which makes this whole situation much more dangerous at a time when we're transitioning power. If you're not going to get a military victory out of this maneuver, there's only one thing that's changed in the formula from the time this Biden administration said we're not going to give you that approval, and that is the election of Donald Trump. So if we're not getting a military advantage here, then why are we doing it? What's the point?
General, I don't want to engage in a debate here, but first of all, things have changed. The appearance of 11 or 12,000 North Korean soldiers on the front lines in Europe against a European country is something that is a dramatic change for the worse.
And by the way, they said they might even put 100,000 up to 100 at one point.
And President Biden did nothing. We should have taken some action, whether it's enhanced sanctions or something. And instead, this is the justification. And yes, the ATACMS are not going to mean that Ukraine is all of a sudden going to win or capture Russian land, but it might mean that Russia is unable to take as much Ukrainian land as they've been trying to do. So I understand the risk, and obviously no one in their right mind wants a nuclear war or the United States more deeply involved. But on the other hand, I think we need to do everything we can to make Ukraine as strong as possible to achieve a fair negotiated settlement.
And real quick, General Holt.
I think you got to there's something that you said, Governor, that I think is the key. And the key is in a weak spot that Russia has right now. Their economy is in shambles. They're running about a 25% inflation rate. They're locking up butter in their stores so that their people can't steal it. This is the place where a Trump administration is trying to come in and use non-military, demilitarized leverage to get a better deal. It's not that Russia gets to keep all of its land and its prizes militarily on the battlefield when they're showing a weak hand negotiation-wise, but no one in the West, period, has explored any of that with them. All they've done is thrown money and weapons, and the weapons have come in incremental fashion, not military fashion towards a victory. They never did that.
Right, and that's the bottom line. And that's the bottom line. General Holt, we got to go, but you're right. I mean, also, if Biden administration wanted to win, they would have given it to them on the day one. They would have not fought the MiGs going in. I mean, it's been the drip.
We would have had a no-fly zone that after.
Oh, it's been despicable. Yes. You know how I feel. I'm half Polish, so I get that. You know that. General Holt, thank you. Great insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General.
Thank you. And everybody, now the other headlines.
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And as we were talking about at the top of the show, President-elect Trump's New York City hush money case might be put on hold for 4 years. That's incredible. The DA's office wanted a pause in the case, but not a dismissal. We'll keep you posted on that. And also, accusations that FEMA aid was politicized during the hurricane season is the focus of a House hearing today. We are going to talk about that with Congresswoman Anna Paulino-Luna right after the break.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Unbelievable. That FEMA worker, remember, was a supervisor who said she's a scapegoat, but a lot of people passed over homes that needed desperate help during the hurricane because they had Trump signs. I mean, it's stunning. And joining us now is Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulino-Luna. Congresswoman, we're so happy to have you back. It's Rita Cosby, Judge Weinberg, Craig Eaton and former New York Governor George Pataki in studio. Tell us about how widespread do you think this is, and the fact that this worker came forward and said it's not just me, that it was kind of written and basically a mandate almost, or a suggestion clearly within FEMA. That's stunning.
Well, it's pretty alarming. What I can tell you is I actually worked with FEMA because my district was one of the hardest districts. We had 13 deaths during the first Hurricane Helene that came through. But, what was really disturbing to me is I actually went through and watched Miss Washington, who was the FEMA employee that was let go for discriminating against conservatives and Trump supporters and Republicans. And during her comments that she made to CNN and also to a few other outlets, she had stated that she was not acting alone, that she was actually at the direction of her supervisor. And this was a common, thing within FEMA, that they felt that Trump supporters and Republicans made them feel in fear of their life. And so they were basically passing over them. So actually what I did is I actually was able to ask Administrator Criswell over at FEMA about whether or not they had fired the other employee, of which she said that it's an open investigation. So I think what you're seeing happening here is, A, we have the evidence. This was not allegations as the media is reporting. It happened. We know that there's open discrimination. And FEMA obviously has done the right thing in firing the first person, but I do think it was more widespread. And according to Ms. Washington, this didn't just happen in Florida. It also happened in North Carolina and Georgia.
Wow. So it happened in North Carolina and Georgia. So how widespread is it? And what's going to happen to these people? What's going to happen to, obviously there'll be I would assume a new FEMA director, but I mean, just testifies? How could this ever have happened?
Well, so I think this is multifaceted. Right now, FEMA needs to be, I think, under the purview of the White House and not under Homeland jurisdiction, right? And then the second thing would be, there's an ongoing investigation, but until we get a new head of FEMA to go in and actually conduct an internal investigation and flush out all the facts, I do think that FEMA and some of these appointees are going to be probably covering their own butts in fear that they're going to be obviously fired for what has happened. But, I think that brings us to the next question on who's going to be our next attorney general. If it's Congressman Matt Gaetz or former Congressman Matt Gaetz, I think that we'll be in good shape. But obviously, it's really upsetting to hear that FEMA conducted themselves like this, because obviously when the information came out, we saw that it was open discrimination against Floridians. We pay into the taxpayer system. And again, FEMA has just shown that they are more inclined to help illegal immigrants than our own American citizens. And it's awful.
Wow. Governor Pataki.
Congresswoman, thank you for looking into this on behalf of the people who were discriminated against. There's no question President Trump is going to shake up not just FEMA, but Homeland Security from top to bottom. He has to, and he will. But is there any chance that the people, particularly the higher-ups, who either knew this was happening or authorized this to happening, will be held accountable, not just by losing their jobs, but is there any possibility of criminal sanctions against people who risk the lives of people simply because of their political belief?
Well, I think that that's something that needs to be considered. Obviously, right now, we don't know to what level authority-wise it went to, right? We know that it was lower-level operators that were implementing this alleged unsaid policy. Also, too, though, I mean, FEMA's conducting their own internal investigation, and along with the Inspector General. And right now, we have an administration that has shown before. We can take the instance of Merrick Garland, that there is a two-tiered justice system in this country under them and under their purview. So I think we'll have to wait for the next administration to come through, but I wouldn't put it past there being criminal charges brought, depending on the level of A, discrimination, but then also two, we have no idea if people that actually were ignored, whether or not they were exposed to mold, whether that mold impacted them, whether there was, fatalities after the fact as a result of this just abhorrent behavior from FEMA. So it's a huge black eye for this organization. And it's an even bigger problem that, the woman, Marnie Washington, that was fired is now coming forward to say, oh, no, there's other people involved. They're using me as a scapegoat, but here's some names. And so I was actually able to ask Administrator Criswell about this. And it's unfortunate that House oversight has to get involved. We would hope that they would just do their jobs and understand that we're all Americans at the end of the day, regardless of political affiliation. But yet here we are.
Well, bravo. Stay on this, Congresswoman. Thank you so much. You are terrific. Keep fighting the great fight for America. This is outrageous. Thank you. Great to have you here, Congresswoman. That's amazing. Isn't that now They're looking into other ones, Governor Pataki.
It's absolutely outrageous.
It was hostile to see a Trump sign?
I mean FEMA is a critical organization that is activated in times of emergency.
Dire
when
crisis.
People are in desperate straits. And the idea that even at those times, matters of life and death, they put politics first.
Shameful.
Is absolutely,
Shameful.
as Craig, as you just said, shameful. It should never happen. And I fear that with a change in administration, people will leave and we will move on. We should not. People who allowed this to happen in FEMA should be not just terminated, but they should be investigated as to whether or not there's any criminal liability for this.
And what
action.
happened if people died? And what happens if their homes are totally wiped out because of this?
How do you get recompense for being passed over when your house was wiped out and you lost maybe a loved one during the hurricane?
Termination is not enough.
Right.
And the idea that FEMA is going to conduct an internal investigation, that is about as reassuring as having Putin investigate what's happening in Ukraine.
The guy who just fell out of the window.
Oh, yeah. By the way, speaking of Putin, I want to get back to the point that President Biden, how disgraceful. You brought up a great point, Governor Pataki, because here it is. North Korean troops, we know that thousands have already gotten there. They're in that region. There's reports there might be 100,000. President Biden has not said even don't is stupid don't.
Nothing.
Remember, not even a minor incursion line, even those stupid lines that many people believe opened the door to Putin to begin with. But he hasn't even said, where is leadership? I mean, under this president, it's stunning.
It's a catastrophe, and it's the reason that Ukraine has suffered so much. The idea that these thousands of North Korean troops are fighting in Europe, and our administration has said nothing about it and essentially done nothing, is just absurd. We should have immediately gone to Putin and say, you crossed the line, it's unacceptable. We're going to impose every possible sanction we can against you, against your country, economically, and we are going to continue to help Ukraine because this is just completely beyond any excuse that, it's a civil war. These are people who want to be part of Russia. You bring in North Korean troops, it's simply a war of evil against people trying to live in freedom.
But, this president has shown no spine, and sadly it fits. Look at the Afghan withdrawal. Look at the way he's waffled over Israel, Judge Weinberg. And yet, I'm not surprised he's done nothing, which is so sad.
Rita, 2 years ago, when people are saying we should have Humvees, we should have Bradleys, we should have tanks, he kept saying, oh, no, this is too risky, we can't do it, and he did it. And it's been that every step of the way. He says no, and then when it's 6 months too late, he changes his mind.
And he leaves this to the next. This is the other thing, too.
And he leaves a mess to the next president.
Yes, President Trump is coming in, and you've got this guy who's escalating it like there's no tomorrow.
Right.
And then also waffling over Israel still. Now, the latest is he wants to sanction Israel and lift the sanctions on Hezbollah and Hamas. What kind of a leader is that, Judge Weinberg?
It's absolutely ridiculous. There are arms coming in from Syria, Russian arms into the war zone of Hezbollah and Hamas. Russian arms, okay?
They got their tentacles everywhere.
Says nothing. And Iran trained them, gave them weapons, funded them. And what did Biden do? He imposes sanctions on Israel. It's if you ever had such a thing as a just war, that's Israel's war against Western civilization.
Absolutely.
And where was the United States backing their play?
Yeah, we've been pathetic, Craig Eaton.
Well, look at who funded this with Iran way back when Biden released how many billions of dollars?
Of course.
And immediately
billions.
after that, and billions, I think it was like $7 billion.
And
after that,
pallets of cash in the middle of the night.
And right after that, and shortly thereafter is when Iran, the Hezbollah came forward again. So,
yeah.
He bankrolled this.
He bankrolled it, and he has not stopped. That's the problem, too. Yeah. You guys, when we come back, we're going to have Megyn Kelly on the show. Can't wait to get her take about what Judge Marchand did against Trump and why she backed Trump. It's the first time she has publicly backed a candidate. My old friend, Megyn Kelly, after the break.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And everybody joining us now here on Katz and Cosby is the great journalist and host of the Megyn Kelly Show on YouTube, the great Megyn Kelly. Megyn, it's so great to have somebody whose birthday is the same as mine on Katz and Cosby, my friend. It's great to talk to you.
Hello, my fellow Scorpio. How are you?
I know. Can you believe it? We both share the same birthday. Great minds think alike, obviously. You have been busy, Megyn Kelly. First of all, you endorsed President Trump. I've never seen you come out and endorse a candidate. There you were. It was right before Election Day. It was huge. Explain why you did that.
You know, it is very unusual. I've never done that before. And I just felt that I had to do it. I don't know how to explain it other than to tell you I felt a calling. I really kind of felt like God was telling me I needed to do it. And I wasn't sure because that was a bridge I had never crossed as a journalist. I've definitely gotten more opinionated since I've started my podcast and, shared a lot more of my own personal beliefs with the audience than I ever did before on television news. So it seems kind of like a natural iteration, but it felt a little risky, but I was really happy I did it.
Yeah, and you also spoke about women's rights, which I think was such an important message, Megyn, for him to hear from you and obviously voters across the country, because Kamala Harris was saying, oh, wait, I basically own the women's rights. You made a great point, and today there was a hearing on the House side talking about all these kids that are missing, all the women and kids that are human trafficked. Explain why you felt he is somebody who protects women's rights.
Well, it's like I said in those remarks that night, that I think that the Democrats think that we are all so obsessed with killing the life that may be growing in our wombs. They've forgotten that most of us are much more obsessed with taking care of the lives once they're actually here. That's what keeps most women up at night. Are my children safe? How can I keep them safe? And am I safe? I want to live with them into, my 80s and 90s, and I want to make sure I'm around to enjoy all the fun milestones and so on. And the things that are a threat to all of that are all things President Trump will help on, and that Kamala Harris didn't talk about at all or promised to make worse. Like the problem with the border is very serious and is costing women's lives daily. Innocent women, not just women at the border, not that they don't count. They count a lot. That's how Jocelyn Nungaro was killed. 12 years old down there. But I mean, across the country now. And the trans thing, little girls are getting hurt. They're getting their innocence stolen, their safety stolen, their medals stolen, their scholarships stolen. It matters. Not to mention what could happen in a bathroom or a locker room. We've seen girls assaulted. We've seen them sexually assaulted. And the other piece of it was what's happening, with our boys and just how the left has been messaging the zero-sum game, and how little girls must advance at the cost of little boys, which no parent who has both would ever accept, no normal human would ever accept. And yet this messaging gets pushed on us, and it's almost ubiquitous on the left, such that it's gospel. And then you find yourself thinking, am I the crazy one? It's just, anyway, that's why I went.
Yeah, you're right. It's sort of like alternate universe. But look, the public spoke overwhelmingly. I mean, he wins the popular vote. He wins electoral. Obviously, House stays and the Senate comes back to the Republicans. The American public spoke. And yet, in the last few hours, Megyn Kelly, we heard from the DA, Alvin Bragg, who said, you know what? We're not going to dismiss this case. We don't want to have this case dropped against him in New York. It's like, didn't they get the message about lawfare?
He can't let go. He's obsessed. That is the most sick position I've heard in a while on the lawfare. He lost. It's over. His case is over. His verdict is going to get overturned. The Supreme Court ruled that you cannot introduce evidence in trying a former president of any of his official behavior while in the White House. Well, that New York trial introduced a ton of that evidence. They had Hope Hicks on the stand. She was working for him while in the White House. They talked in their summation about how important that evidence was to the government's case. So there's no chance that this thing doesn't get reversed and thrown out. And even if Judge Merchan won't throw it out, it'll get thrown out by the first department, the appellate court. So the case is over, whether Alvin Bragg wants to admit it or not. And the fact is, I heard Jonathan Turley say this, and it's a good way of putting it. He wants to keep Trump on a leash somehow for the next 4 years with this threat of Alvin Bragg, the tough guy, looming over him. It's an absurdity, and it should not be allowed. Judge Merchan needs to do the right thing.
And at the same time, Megyn Kelly, he also, look at D.A. Bragg. I mean, you know New York City. We both know New York City well. It's like a revolving door in the justice system. There was a guy who was stabbing somebody the other day multiple times. I think he had 8 or 9 priors. That guy's out. Why is that happening? And yet Trump on a business ledger case, you know?
And by the way, no one ever saw the records. His alleged fraud was seen by no one. It wasn't seen by anybody until they subpoenaed the documents and said, show us your alleged fraud, to no one sitting on your bookshelf. Anyway, Alvin Bragg and Judge Merchan are on a power trip driven by their hatred for Donald Trump, their abject TDS. And no one's going to be able to reason with them. They're going to have to learn by being struck down by a higher court. And I imagine Judge Merchan's not going to be reasonable in his ruling, and it is going to take either the First Department or the Appellate Division or the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York State, to teach them that they can't do this.
So what was it, Stalin, who said, show me the man and I'll show you the crime, Megyn Kelly?
Yeah. Well, can I tell you, Rita, I said this during the middle of the lawfare, and I haven't really changed my mind. I don't think these Democrats are going to learn until one of theirs has skin in the game. I'm not going to lie. I would start investigating what exactly has Adam Schiff been doing? How are Nancy Pelosi's trades? Are they all above board? What's going on at the Clinton Foundation? Honestly, if one of theirs gets put through what President Trump got put through, they won't stop. When they get back in power, they'll do it again. I mean, right now, this whole thing with Trump, they're threatening to resume this nonsense, which probably helped get him elected when he leaves office. So I know it's bad. It took me a long time to get to the point of saying, you want to weaponize the DOJ, we need to weaponize against you as well. But that is where I am right now.
And speaking of the wake-up call in the media, you and I both worked at Fox. We also both worked at NBC. Megyn, you look at what happened with Joe Scarborough and Mika. They were bashing Trump. I mean, they called him Hitler for years. And yet they went with their tail between their legs and went down to Mar-a-Lago and talked with him recently. What was your reaction to that?
I mean, they're such pathetic, groveling grifters. It was somewhat stomach-turning. But when you think about it this way, it's better that they had to grovel, that they were brought to heel. They were brought to heel. They tried for years to ruin Trump. I mean, racist, sexist, rapist, fascist, Hitler-esque Nazi. That was the messaging on that show about Trump for years. And what the American electorate said to them was, you're irrelevant. We're not listening to you. No one's listening to you. You have no power. And Joe Scarborough in particular is so desperate to be needed, to be in the halls and the circles of power, that he will grovel to anyone just to have access. He's the one who told us Joe Biden was the best Joe Biden 2 months before his on-air debate meltdown. He will say anything just to stay in the circles of power. Trump knows it. His audience now knows it. And shame on the fool who trusts these two. That's all I can say.
It is amazing to see the turnabout for sure. Well, Megyn Kelly, before I let you go, your podcast is awesome. You have always been an enormous success, my friend. You're a successful attorney. You've been a successful broadcaster. What can people get on your YouTube? Because it is hot as hot. I love it.
All right. You're so nice. But what this audience needs to know is you were a reporting goddess to me when we were both at Fox News. My team and I used to say, WWRD, what would Rita do? Because you got the stories. You got stories nobody else would get. You got the ungettable. And so when we bumped up into no time and time again, we learned to not take no because of WWRD. Oh. So you are very kind to give me any sort of a shout out. But if people would like to hear what we're saying on the show, is just go to youtube.com/Megyn Kelly, or you can catch me on SiriusXM or any podcast for free, wherever you get your podcast.
Well, you are awesome, and I always think, what would Megyn do too? And I'm so proud of you, my friend. Happy belated birthday, and it's so awesome to have you here on Cats and Cosby.
Thanks for having me, my love. See you soon.
Thank you, Megan. Really great to have you. Very sweet. And by the way, everybody, nearly 1.3 million New Yorkers are struggling to feed themselves and their families. So please consider partnering with the WABC Foundation, AARP of New York, the Catholic Charities, St. Francis Feeding the Hungry. There are so many ways to help and to be able to give back and help hungry people, help those in need. And with your help, we can. Last year, we fed over 10,000 families. This year, we're looking to do a lot more. Go to WABCRadio.com/turkey to feed the hungry this holiday season. And, you know, Governor Pataki, we just have about 2 minutes or so left, but I'm sitting here thinking, what a mess President Trump is inheriting. We just talked about all that stuff with Megyn Kelly. Wow.
What a mess is right. Well, first, let me say that I'm glad President Trump won so clearly. He won the Electoral College. He won the popular vote. There's no question that he is the president. He has a majority of the people behind him. And all Americans now should be behind him because we all want the president to succeed. He is facing a mess domestically with the border, with the illegal immigrants, with inflation coming up again, and the trillions in deficits that Biden's run up. And, of course, internationally, everything is falling apart. You have China, North Korea, Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia, now with North Korean soldiers. So it is a mess. But the American people wanted change. I believe Donald Trump's going to bring them that change. And hopefully all Americans, including those who didn't vote for him, are going to give him the opportunity to get us out from under this catastrophe and lead us to a better future.
Yeah, that's a great point. You need a warrior, I feel like, right now. Real quick, Craig.
You know, we had 4 years of disastrous leadership. And you know what? Like the governor said, we're all Americans. We need to stand behind him. And we need to hope for the best.
Yeah, we got to do the best for our country.
Pray for America.
Absolutely. Everybody should get behind him and want the best. And finally have a leader in control with some of this craziness that you guys just eloquently described. And everybody, what do we all stand for, guys?
Truth, justice, and the American way.
God bless America, everybody.
God bless America.
And God bless President Trump.
Your time and expertise are valuable, making Focus one of the most important resources to have at work. These days, professionals spend nearly half the work week on written communication, and it can be difficult to stay on task with all the emails and documents you have to get through. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and quickly get through your work with relevant real-time suggestions wherever you write. It works across 500,000 apps and websites, so it can help with everything, from brainstorming presentation ideas to sounding more confident and persuasive in emails and reports. For 15 years, Grammarly has offered best-in-class communication support and enterprise-grade security on a business model that doesn't sell your data. 93% of professionals report that Grammarly helps them get more work done. Download Grammarly for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast.